The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, humming with a frequency that made the porch boards shiver. Inside the cryopod, a blue-skinned girl with fractured bioluminescent patterns stared up at nothing, her eyes dim as dying stars. Her mother had sent her across 3 galaxies as a cruel joke, a defective daughter dumped on a grieving human widower who'd never asked for anything but peace. But when Thomas Hale opened that pod and saw something in her eyes that mirrored his own brokenness, he made a choice that would shake 2 worlds. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The porch groaned under weight. It was never designed to hold. Thomas Hale stood in the doorway of his cabin, coffee going cold in his hand, staring at the cryopod that had materialized sometime between midnight and dawn. No delivery truck, no warning. Just a 7-foot cylinder of alien metal humming like a trapped wasp, frost crawling across its surface in patterns that looked almost like words. The mountains of Montana stretched behind him, pine and stone and sky so wide it hurt to look at. He'd moved here after Sarah died, after the funeral where people said things that meant nothing, after the city became a gallery of memories he couldn't bear to walk through. 3 years of silence, 3 years of splitting wood and fixing fences and learning how to be alone without going mad. And now this. The pod's surface shimmered, translucent for just a moment, and Thomas saw her. A girl, maybe 16 or 17 in human years, though with aliens who could say. Her skin was the blue of deep ocean ice, smooth except for the right side of her face, where bioluminescent patterns flickered weakly, dying constellations mapped across her cheek and temple. Her eyes were open but unseeing, amber irises ringed with silver, staring at nothing while the cryo mist swirled around her like ghosts. She wore something like a hospital gown, thin and gray, and her hands were pressed flat against the glass as if she'd been trying to push her way out when the freeze took her. Thomas set his coffee on the railing. His hands shook slightly, though whether from the cold or something else he couldn't say. There was a data pad magnetically sealed to the pod's side. He pulled it free, and the screen flickered to life. Alien script, scrolling too fast to read before switching to English. The translation was rough, clearly automated. Delivery for Thomas Hale. Contents: 1. Zenthari, female. Substandard classification. Dismissed from maternal household creche due to genetic deficiency and failure to meet species integration standards. Placed in your care as per Joke Protocol 77, subsection D. No return policy available. Dispose as you see fit. Thomas read it twice, then a third time. Joke Protocol. Dispose as you see fit. His jaw tightened. He'd heard of the Zenthari. Everyone had since first contact 19 years ago. Elegant, powerful, their genetics controlled with the precision of sculptors working marble. They were humanity's reluctant allies in the Galactic Council, beautiful and cold and utterly convinced of their own superiority. And someone had sent him one of their daughters like a prank gift, like she was trash to be thrown away. Inside the pod, the girl's eyes flickered. Just once, barely a movement. But Thomas saw it. Thomas pressed his palm against the pod's surface. The metal was cold enough to burn, but he didn't pull away. Inside, the girl's chest rose and fell in the shallow rhythm of cryo-sleep, her breath fogging the glass in tiny clouds that vanished almost as soon as they formed. The bioluminescent patterns on her face pulsed weakly, out of sync, like a heart struggling to remember its own beat. He'd seen that look before. In the mirror, mostly. In the months after Sarah's car had skidded off a black ice road and into a canyon. When breathing felt like a chore, his body kept doing out of stubborn habit. The look of someone the world had decided wasn't worth keeping. His phone was inside, buried in a drawer somewhere because he rarely used it anymore. But the pod had a manual release, a failsafe built into the design in case of emergency. 3 symbols glowed faintly on the control panel. He didn't need a translator to understand what they meant. Open, delay, terminate. His finger hovered over the 3rd symbol. It would be easy. Press it. Let the cryo systems do their work, and by morning there'd be nothing left but sterile vapor and a story he'd never have to explain. No one would blame him. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't signed up to be the punchline of some alien family's cruel joke, but his hand moved to the first symbol instead. The pod hissed, a long exhalation like a held breath, finally released. Frost cracked and fell away in sheets, clattering against the porch. The glass panel slid upward, and warm air rushed in, carrying the scent of ozone and something floral he didn't recognize. The girl's eyes snapped open, fully this time, and she sucked in a gasping breath that rattled in her chest. She lurched forward, hands grasping at nothing, and Thomas caught her before she could fall. She was lighter than he expected, her bones delicate beneath skin that felt like cooled silk. Her fingers dug into his flannel shirt, and she stared up at him with eyes that cycled through 3 different colors before settling on amber streaked with panic. She tried to speak, but what came out was a sound like wind through broken chimes, discordant and desperate. Not English, not any language he knew. Thomas lowered her carefully to the porch, keeping one hand on her shoulder to steady her. She was shaking, her whole body trembling like a wire pulled too tight. The patterns on her face flickered faster now, red and violet and a sickly yellow that looked like infection. Her breathing came in short, sharp bursts. Panic attack, Thomas realized. He knew the shape of it, the way the body betrays you when the mind can't hold on. He did what Sarah used to do for him in those early days when grief felt like drowning. He sat down beside her, close but not crowding, and breathed slowly, audibly, letting her hear the rhythm. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. After a long minute, her breathing began to match his. The patterns on her face slowed to a gentler pulse, and when she finally looked at him again, there was something new in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or just the faint, fragile beginning of trust. The girl sat on his porch for 20 minutes without moving, wrapped in the wool blanket Thomas had brought from inside. She stared at the mountains like she was trying to memorize them, her amber eyes tracking the line where stone met sky. The bioluminescent patterns on her face had settled into a steady, dim glow, soft blue with occasional flickers of lavender. Thomas sat in the chair he'd built last summer, the one Sarah had sketched out on a napkin 3 weeks before the accident. He drank his reheated coffee and waited. Patience was something he'd learned in the years since her death. How to sit with silence, how to let moments unfold without forcing them into shape. The girl's fingers traced the edge of the blanket, following the weave like it held some secret language. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough, unpracticed, but the words were English, broken, heavily accented, but understandable. "You are Thomas Hale." He nodded. "I am." She looked down at her hands, at the faint shimmer of her blue skin against the brown wool. "My mother sent me to you, as joke. You know this word? Joke, I know it." Her throat worked, swallowing something bitter. "In Zenthari culture, we do not keep the broken ones. We fix or we remove. I am unfixable. My bioluminescence does not synchronize. My neural patterns do not align with species standard. I am genetic. Failure." She said it the way someone recites a diagnosis they've heard too many times to feel anymore. Thomas set his coffee down. "What's your name?" She blinked at him, as if the question was in a language she'd forgotten existed. "I was designated Specimen 47 Chi, but my mother called me Lyra before she stopped calling me anything." "Lyra," Thomas repeated, letting the name settle. "That's a good name." Something flickered across her face, too quick to catch. "You do not have to keep me. The datapad said you could dispose as you see fit. I understand disposal. It is logical conclusion for defective things." Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and met her eyes with the same steady calm he'd used on spooked horses back when he had a life that included other living things. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. Car accident, black ice, gone in a moment. And for a long time after, I felt like I was the defective one, like I was the mistake the universe should have thrown away instead of her." Lyra's glow pulsed once, sharp and bright. "But you are human. You have value by nature of being human. I am Zenthari who cannot be Zenthari. There is no value in that." Value isn't something someone else gets to decide for you, Thomas said quietly, and I'm not big on letting cruel people write the ending of someone's story. He stood, joints creaking slightly, and held out his hand. You hungry? I was about to make breakfast, nothing fancy, just eggs and toast, but it's warm and it's real, and you're welcome to it. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, her patterns cycling through colors he was starting to recognize as emotions: fear, confusion, and beneath it all, something that looked almost like hope. She took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. The kitchen was small, built for one person who didn't expect company. Wooden counters worn smooth by years of use, a cast-iron skillet older than Thomas, windows that framed the mountains like paintings Sarah used to say were better than any gallery. Lyra stood in the doorway, uncertain, her blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like armor. Thomas cracked eggs into a bowl, the sound sharp and ordinary in the quiet morning. You can sit, he said, nodding toward the table. Or stand, if that's more comfortable. No rules here. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, and lowered herself into the chair opposite his usual spot. Her eyes tracked everything, cataloging details with the precision of someone trained to find threats in safe spaces. The way soldiers looked at rooms, Thomas thought, or people who'd learned that safety was usually a lie. He whisked the eggs with a fork, added salt and pepper, poured them into the heated skillet. The sizzle filled the space between them. Lyra's nose wrinkled slightly, her head tilting. That smell. It is protein combustion? It's called cooking, Thomas said, smiling despite himself. Humans have a thing about applying heat to food before eating it. Old habit. Zenthari consume nutrient paste. Efficient, standardized, no combustion required. She said it like reciting from a textbook, but her eyes stayed fixed on the eggs as they scrambled into golden clouds. Thomas buttered toast, plated everything, and set it in front of her with a fork. She stared at the fork like it might attack her. It's a utensil, he explained. For eating, you stab the food, or scoop it, and bring it to your mouth. Humans are messy eaters, so we invented tools to pretend we're civilized. Lyra picked up the fork, holding it like a surgical instrument. She speared a piece of egg, examined it from 3 angles, then carefully placed it in her mouth. Her eyes went wide. The patterns on her face flared bright blue, then violet, then a gold Thomas hadn't seen before. She chewed slowly, swallowed, and immediately stabbed another piece. This is permitted, she asked between bites. This level of flavor variance. Thomas sat down with his own plate. Not only permitted, encouraged. She ate like someone making up for lost time, methodical but hungry. And when her plate was empty, she set the fork down with the careful precision of someone returning a sacred object. Among my people, I was fed alone, in sterile room, so my defects would not contaminate others during consumption. Her voice was flat, but her patterns flickered red at the edges. Thomas felt something tighten in his chest. Well, here you eat at a table, with another person, and the only thing you're contaminating is my cooking, which honestly could use the company. She looked at him, confusion written in the tilt of her head. You make humor about painful thing? Sometimes humor is how we survive painful things, Thomas said. Lyra considered this, her fingers tracing the edge of the empty plate. Then, softly, like she was testing out a new language, she smiled. It was small, uncertain, and lasted maybe 2 seconds. But it was real, and when Thomas smiled back, something in the cabin felt less empty than it had in 3 years. The communication device activated at dusk, 3 days after Lyra's arrival. Thomas was teaching her how to chop vegetables, his hands guiding hers through the motion of the knife, when the living room exploded with holographic light. A woman materialized in the center of the room, 8 feet tall and impossibly elegant, her skin the same blue as Lyra's but flawless, unmarred by asymmetry. Her bioluminescent patterns moved in perfect synchronized waves across her face and exposed shoulders, a living display of genetic superiority. She wore robes that shimmered like oil on water, and her eyes, cold silver without a trace of warmth, swept the cabin with undisguised contempt. Lyra's knife clattered to the cutting board. Every pattern on her face went dark. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between the hologram and the girl who'd gone rigid as stone behind him. "I am Matriarch Ceres of Household Koresh," the woman announced, her voice like crystal scraped across metal. "I am calling to confirm disposal of defective offspring. Has the human completed termination protocols?" Thomas felt Lyra flinch behind him. He kept his voice level, the same tone he'd used with aggressive drunks back when he tended bar in college. Calm, unmoved. "No termination. Lyra's staying here." The matriarch's patterns flashed red, a color Thomas was learning meant anger. "The creature has a designation, not a name, and you were sent disposal instructions, not adoption paperwork. I paid significant credits for that delivery. The joke was meant to humiliate you, human, not burden you." "Well, the joke's on you," Thomas said. "Because she's not a burden. She's a kid who deserves better than being thrown away by someone who's supposed to love her." Ceres laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Love is inefficient. Zenthari do not love. We cultivate genetic excellence. We refine. The specimen is genetically compromised. Her neural variance is 0.7 degrees outside acceptable parameters. Her bioluminescence desynchronized. She cannot integrate. She cannot contribute. She is waste." Behind Thomas, Lyra made a sound like a wounded animal trying not to be heard. Thomas's jaw tightened. "You know what I think is waste? A mother who looks at her daughter and sees a failed experiment instead of a person. That's the real defect here. And it's got nothing to do with genetics." The matriarch's eyes narrowed. "You dare lecture me on Zenthari culture, human? Your species barely achieved spaceflight. You are evolutionary children playing with adult concepts." "Maybe so," Thomas said. "But even children know you don't throw people away when they don't meet your expectations. That's not culture. That's cruelty dressed up in fancy words." Ceres studied him with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining bacteria. Then her gaze shifted past him to Lyra, who stood trembling in the kitchen doorway, her patterns flickering erratically. "If you keep the specimen human, know this. She will never be Zenthari. She will never be worthy. And when you tire of her failures, when her defects become too tiresome, you will understand why I made the correct choice." The hologram vanished. The room fell into darkness, and in that darkness, Thomas heard Lyra begin to cry in a language that needed no translation. Lyra didn't come out of her room for 2 days. Thomas had given her the guest bedroom, the one Sarah had painted soft yellow before they'd learned they couldn't have children, before the adoption paperwork got lost in bureaucracy, before the accident made all of it irrelevant. He left food outside her door 3 times a day, toast and eggs, soup he'd made from scratch, apple slices arranged on a plate because he'd noticed she liked the way they crunched. Most of it sat untouched, growing cold in the hallway. On the 3rd morning, he knocked softly. "Lyra, I'm not asking you to come out, but I'm here if you want to talk." Silence. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. "Why did you defend me to her?" Thomas leaned against the doorframe. "Because you're worth defending. You do not know me. You do not know what I am." "I know enough." He heard movement inside, footsteps across creaking floorboards. The door opened a crack, and Lyra's face appeared in the gap, her patterns dim as dying embers. Her eyes were red-rimmed, though he didn't know if Zenthari could actually produce tears or if the redness was something else. "On my world," she said, her voice hoarse, "perfection is not goal, it is minimum requirement. From birth, we are scanned, measured, optimized. Our genetics are edited before we draw first breath. Our neural patterns are shaped like clay. If the clay cracks, if the pattern deviates, we are removed from the shaping house." She opened the door wider. She'd changed from the gray gown into clothes Thomas had left for her. An old flannel shirt that hung to her knees and sweatpants rolled at the ankles. Human clothes on an alien frame, nothing fit quite right, but she wore them like they mattered. I was shaped 7 times, she continued. 7 genetic corrections. Each time, my mother was certain the next iteration would be the one that worked. But my patterns would not synchronize. My mind thought in ways that did not match Zenthari standard. The doctors said my brain was too flexible, too prone to emotional variance. They called it neural chaos. Thomas opened his mouth, but she held up one hand. "Let me finish. Please." He nodded. On my 16th rotation, my mother convened a family tribunal. 12 matriarchs, all geneticists, all disappointed. They examined me for 6 hours, measured my failures in granular detail, and then my mother spoke the words that ended me. She said, "A garden does not mourn the weeds it pulls. It simply makes room for stronger flowers." Her patterns flashed red, then black, then red again. She sent me here to prove a point to her peers, that even humans, who she considers genetically inferior, would reject me. That my worthlessness transcends species. The joke was meant to be you disposing of me, confirming that even the lowest form of intelligent life found me unacceptable. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest, old grief mixing with fresh anger. "Lyra, look at me." She met his eyes. "Your mother's wrong. Not just about you. About what makes someone worth keeping. Perfection isn't what makes us human. Our flaws, our failures, our ability to keep going when we're broken. That's what matters. And if Zenthari culture can't see that, then maybe they're the ones who are defective." Spring came to Montana like a whispered promise, snow melting into streams that sang down the mountainside. Lyra had been with Thomas for 2 months, and the cabin had changed in small ways that added up to something bigger. Her jacket hung beside his on the hook by the door. Her books, data pads filled with human literature she'd become obsessed with, cluttered the coffee table. The kitchen smelled like her experiments, combinations of earth spices and Zenthari techniques that sometimes worked and sometimes created smoke alarms. Thomas taught her how to fix the fence that winter had damaged, how to split wood with an axe that felt too heavy in her delicate hands, until she learned the rhythm wasn't about strength but momentum. She taught him Zenthari meditation, breathing patterns that slowed his heart when grief came knocking at 3 in the morning. They didn't talk about mothers or worthiness. They just lived, day by day, building something neither of them had words for yet. One afternoon, while they sat on the porch watching clouds build towers against the sky, Lyra said, "I have been translating something. For you. May I share it?" Thomas set down the wood he'd been sanding. "Of course." She pulled out her data pad, fingers dancing across the screen until she found what she wanted. Her patterns glowed soft gold. The color he'd learned meant nervousness mixed with hope. "This is Zenthari poem. Very old. From before we became obsessed with genetic perfection. It is called The Flawed Stone. I will read it in English." She cleared her throat. "The mason finds a stone with crack running through its heart. Other masons say discard it, it will crumble under weight. But the wise mason sees the crack and thinks, this is where the light will enter. This is where the rain will pool and give birth to moss. This is where the stone becomes more than stone. It becomes story." Her voice wavered on the last word. Thomas felt something tighten in his throat. "That's beautiful, Lyra. My grandmother taught it to me before she died. Before my mother erased all record of her from family archive. Grandmother was also defective. Her patterns were asymmetrical. But she was kindest person I ever knew." She looked at Thomas, and her patterns cycled through a dozen colors before settling on a blue so deep it looked like the ocean Sarah used to paint. "I think you are like the wise mason. You saw my cracks and did not discard me. You let light enter instead." Thomas reached over and squeezed her shoulder. The gesture easy now, familiar. "I think we're both cracked stones, kid. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's better than okay." Lyra leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder in a way she'd started doing when the world felt too big. They sat like that while the sun dropped lower, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Inside the cabin, Thomas's phone rang. He'd started using it again, slowly reconnecting with the world. But right now, it could wait. Right now, he had a daughter, not by blood or species or any conventional measure, but by choice, sitting beside him while evening turned the sky into watercolor, and when she whispered, "Thank you for keeping me," he whispered back, "Thank you for staying." The letter came on a Tuesday, delivered by a Galactic Council courier who looked uncomfortable standing on a porch that smelled like pine and coffee instead of sterile protocol. Thomas signed for it with the same calm he'd brought to everything since Lyra arrived, but his hand tightened on the envelope when he saw the seal. Zenthari Maternal Council. Official documentation. Lyra was in the garden she'd planted behind the cabin, coaxing tomatoes and strange purple vegetables from her home world to grow side by side. She'd said something about teaching different species to share soil, about proving integration was possible if you were patient enough. When she saw Thomas standing in the doorway holding the letter, her patterns went dark. "They want me back." It wasn't a question. Thomas opened the envelope, scanned the contents. Legal language, cold and precise, outlining Zenthari custody law and human jurisdiction, and a dozen clauses that boiled down to one thing. Ceres had petitioned the Galactic Council to reclaim her daughter. Not because she wanted her, because the idea of a human raising a Zenthari, even a defective one, had become political ammunition for her rivals. "They're saying, I don't have legal guardianship," Thomas said quietly, "that you're property of household Karesh until you reach age 21, which in Zenthari years is another 8 rotations." Lyra's hands curled into fists, dirt still under her fingernails from planting. "If I return, they will place me in corrective facility. It is where they send all failures who survive past childhood. Genetic study. Neural mapping. You become data instead of person." Thomas folded the letter and met her eyes. "Then we fight it. You cannot fight the Maternal Council. They have resources, lawyers, galactic law on their side." "Maybe," Thomas said, "but they don't have what we have." "What do we have?" "A story." He pulled out his phone, the one he'd been using more lately, reconnecting with old friends from his journalism days before Sarah, before grief, before Montana. Humans have this thing we do when law doesn't match up with what's right. We tell the story. We make noise. We make it so expensive, so publicly messy to do the wrong thing that doing the right thing becomes easier. Lyra's patterns flickered orange, confusion mixed with something that might have been hope. "You would fight my mother for me?" "Lyra," Thomas said, and his voice carried the weight of 2 months' worth of breakfast conversations and fence repairs and late-night talks about belonging. "You're my daughter, not by paper, not by blood, but by every choice we've made since that morning you showed up on my porch, and I don't abandon my daughter." She crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his shoulder. Her patterns blazed gold and blue and a green he'd never seen before, colors that had no name in any language but meant the same thing in all of them. Thomas held her, while the mountains watched, while the garden grew in defiance of textbooks that said those plants couldn't coexist, while somewhere across the galaxy, a cold woman in perfect robes prepared legal documents that didn't account for the one thing she'd never understood. That family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. The hearing took place via holographic tribunal, 3 representatives from the Galactic Council seated in judgment, while Thomas and Lyra stood in their small living room transformed into courtroom. Matriarch Ceres appeared in full ceremonial attire, her patterns synchronized to perfection, a living demonstration of Zenthari genetic mastery. Her lawyer, a gray-scaled Vrexian with eyes like polished stones, spoke first. "Zenthari law is clear. Offspring remain property of the maternal household until age of majority. The human Thomas Hale has no legal claim to specimen 47 Chi, regardless of emotional attachment that may have formed during temporary placement." Thomas's lawyer, a fierce woman named Chen, who'd taken the case pro bono after reading about it online, countered immediately. "Lyra is not property. She's a sentient being capable of making her own choices. And Zenthari law also states that a child abandoned by maternal household forfeits protection of that household." Ceres didn't place her daughter. She disposed of her. Ceres's patterns flashed red. Temporary displacement for educational purposes is not abandonment. You sent her in a cryopod with instructions to dispose as seen fit, Chen said, pulling up the original delivery datapad. That's not education. That's attempted murder dressed up as a joke. The tribunal murmured among themselves. The head arbiter, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix, spoke with a voice like wind chimes. We require testimony from the child in question. Specimen 47, Kai, approach. Lyra stepped forward, her patterns cycling through colors too fast to name. Thomas touched her shoulder once, a brief anchor, then let her go. State your name, the arbiter said. My designation is Specimen 47 Kai, but my name is Lyra Hale. Ceres's lawyer objected immediately. She has no legal right to claim human surname. I claim it anyway, Lyra said, her voice steady in a way Thomas had never heard before. Because Thomas Hale taught me something my biological mother never could. He taught me that defective is not a diagnosis. It is a lie we tell ourselves when we are too afraid to accept variation. She turned to face Ceres directly. You measured my worth in pattern synchronization and neural conformity, but you never measured what matters. My capacity for growth, my ability to love, my willingness to build instead of destroy. By your standards, I am failure. By any measure that matters, I am becoming something you could never engineer. I am becoming whole. Her patterns blazed, every color at once, chaotic and beautiful and entirely her own. Thomas Hale did not save me from defectiveness. He saved me from a culture that mistakes control for perfection. And if given choice between returning to your sterile laboratories or staying with the man who taught me that cracks are where the light enters, I choose the light. Every time. Forever. The room went silent. Even the energy being seemed to pause, its crystalline form pulsing with something that might have been emotion. Ceres stood rigid, her perfect pattern suddenly looking less like mastery and more like cage bars. And when the tribunal reconvened after deliberation, when they ruled that a child's choice of family supersedes genetic custody when abandonment is proven, Thomas didn't cheer or celebrate. He simply held his daughter while she cried tears of relief in a language both of them understood. 6 months after the tribunal, the garden had grown wild with possibility. Tomatoes climbed trellises next to Zenthari spiral vines that bloomed silver in moonlight. Earth herbs tangled with alien flowers that hummed when the wind touched them just right. Lyra had stopped trying to keep them separate, had learned instead to let them find their own way of coexisting. Roots intertwining beneath soil that belonged to both and neither. Thomas built her a workshop in the barn, a space where she could combine human engineering with Zenthari biotech, creating things neither culture had imagined alone. She'd designed a prosthetic hand for a veteran in town, one that responded to neural patterns instead of electronic signals. She'd helped the local school develop a program teaching kids that different didn't mean less than. And on quiet evenings, she still sat on the porch with Thomas, watching the mountains hold up the sky. Her patterns had changed, not synchronized, never that, but settled into a rhythm that was uniquely hers. Blue and gold and violet and sometimes that green that only appeared when she was deeply, completely happy. The medical scanners called it chaos. Thomas called it beautiful. One evening, while they worked side by side replanting the garden for fall, Lyra said, I received message from Zenthari Cultural Reform Council. They want me to speak at symposium about genetic diversity and cultural evolution. Thomas looked up from the hole he was digging. That's incredible, Lyra. What did you tell them? I said yes, but only if they let me bring my father. She said it casually, like the word father didn't remake the entire world. Thomas's throat tightened. Lyra, you know I'm not your biological father. She set down her trowel and looked at him with eyes that held the wisdom of someone who'd crossed galaxies to learn what home meant. Biology is just chemistry pretending to be destiny. You taught me that. Family is what you build when chemistry fails. Family is choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. Family is teaching someone that their cracks are not flaws but features. Her patterns pulsed, soft gold. You are my father in every way that word holds meaning. And if you will have me, I would like to formally take your name, not just Hale, all of it, Lyra Sarah Hale. Thomas felt something break open in his chest, old grief transforming into something new. Sarah's name, carried forward by a blue-skinned girl from across the stars who'd learned to garden in Montana soil and cook eggs that tasted like belonging. She would have loved you, he said, voice rough. She would have loved you so much. I know, Lyra said. I feel her in the yellow walls of my bedroom, in the way you smile when I make terrible jokes, in this garden where nothing should grow together but everything does anyway. She held out her hand, still stained with earth, and he took it. They stood there while the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their whole story, from cryopod to tribunal, to this moment where father and daughter was no longer question but answer. Above them, stars began to appear, alien and familiar all at once. Somewhere among them, Ceres was probably calculating genetic equations, still searching for perfection in all the wrong places. But here, in a cabin that smelled like pine and coffee and strange purple vegetables from a world Lyra barely remembered, two cracked stones had found each other and built something that would outlast any definition of perfect. They had built home. And home, they'd learned, was not a place you found. It was a word you built together, one choice at a time, until it held you both.